Hello again. Thank you very much for being with us at the second panel of this Sinaia Forum for Democracy and Transatlantic Relations. This is indeed a unique opportunity for all of us, and I include also people sitting in front of us today to hear what is so important for Romania, for the Romanian society, for the Romanian business community and its allies, partners and neighboring countries in terms of security. This panel is a special one because we have speakers from across the ocean, from the United States. I will introduce them bit by bit. We have Mr. Ryan Tully, National Security Advisor to the United States House of Representatives Armed Services Committee. We also have Mr. T. Ulrich Breckbühl, 33rd Counselor of the United States Department of State. We will have also Mr. Paul Saunders from the Center for the National Interest, Washington, D.C., and Dr. Olga Chiriac here on my right for the moment, Project Europe Director with the Irregular Warfare Initiative. I am Bogdan Nicolae, and together with Mrs. Corina Popescu, we are two of the co-founders of the Swift Energy, but I will speak today also from my previous professional experience. And also on stage with us is Dr. Engineer Alin Diniță. You have had the pleasure to hear his comments and contribution in the first panel for the energy. Humans have been fighting for what they think it's security since ages. And in doing so, they have also created insecurity for others. The security issue is also the insecurity issue, and what we have today probably is one of the most important insecurity crises that the humankind faces. Although the title of the panel relates to the regional security, I think the Southeast European region should be perceived as part of the global effort to keep the worldwide security. In the theory, it is known that those who control the Southeast Europe, in fact, may control Europe, and those who control Europe may control the world. This is a geopolitical theory, and we will get maybe fresh perspectives from our speakers from the United States and from speakers on the stage. Please prepare your questions for a session at the end of this panel. And if we have our first speaker, Mr. Ryan Tully, I will say a couple of words from his bio just to have you familiar with his previous activities. Mr. Tully is a professional staff member for the United States House of Representatives Armed Services Committee. Prior to his current duties, he was Deputy Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Europe at the White House National Security Council. Mr. Tully, thank you. You are online with us. Would you please give us your thoughts about the very essence of the current crisis that we are facing in terms of security here in the region, but also in a broader sense beyond Southeast Europe?
For sure, I just want to check first that, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. Well, I think that the U.S.-Turkish relationship, particularly as it's viewed from Congress these days, is a very positive one. Even before Putin's reinvasion of Ukraine, Romania was doing a lot of the right things in investments, both security, but also energy, 5G, things like that. And that hasn't gone unnoticed here in the House. I'm kind of talking to you from the basement of the U.S. Capitol. as you could probably tell. But the investments that Romania and the southeastern portion of NATO has made has been extraordinary. Romania was buying HIMARS and Patriot before it was fashionable to do so. It's been making investments in infrastructure at bases like MK and trying to make a more permanent U.S. presence there. And now, I mean, just this last week, we've seen the approval of more Abrams that'll be going to Romania, and the setting up of an F-16 training hub for Ukrainian pilots. I'd like to, if you haven't seen it yet, I'd like to draw your attention to an op-ed that was written by the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Mike Rogers, from late summer, and it's entitled "NATO Has a New Backbone." And it talks about how the eastern front of NATO, I'm going to slap for saying flank, the eastern front of NATO is taken over the true security of the alliance from the West. It is making the investments that are necessary to defend and deter Russian aggression. And that's where the heart and the backbone of NATO lies these days, the Balts, the Poles, the Romania, and all the way down. And that's where the resources that Ukraine is getting to fight comes from. It was the resources early on, the first to give Stinger missiles. It was the first to give their javelins, to empty their stocks because of, not empty their stocks, but to give to Ukraine because they knew that every Russian armored personnel carrier tank that was destroyed in Ukraine was one less one that would be able to threaten it. And it's just been extraordinary to see. Two other points I'd make. Part of this recognition you can see is in the legislation that we have moving through the Congress. That is, there's a Black Sea Security Initiative that was attached to the National Defense Authorization Act. It's meant to direct the White House to come up with a strategy for the Black Sea. It is meant to look at resources for the Black Sea region and the eastern front of NATO. It is meant to look at energy diversification and what more the U.S. could be doing, and also to look at other critical infrastructure like 5G and to see how the U.S. could better aid those countries in advancing and diversifying, particularly away from Russian or Chinese sources. The final thing that I would say is that there is a view developing in the Congress and in DC that the way that this war will come to a conclusion, or at least that that Ukraine will be able to become more self-sufficient in this, is through the Black Sea. Being able to get grain out and to get Ukrainian exports out in a substantial fashion and manner will be able to help the Ukrainian economy get stood back up and become more where it was 2-3 years ago. The way you'll be able to do that is by pushing Russia back and making the Black Sea safe for transit, for shipments, and for commerce. With Russia's position in Crimea and position and ability to control the Black Sea is where it threatens those supply and shipping lines. So it's why you're seeing more recently the provision of longer strike weapons, the provision of things that are more able to reach out and touch Ukraine, to touch Crimea, to be able to push back Russian forces in the Black Sea and make it more safe. And I think that is one of the ways that you'll see folks start to talk about a way forward and kind of getting the crushing, crippling grip that Russia has around the Ukrainian economy and getting it back to where it's much more stable and ability to produce things for itself. So with that's kind of the DC congressional perspective a little bit, and I'm happy to hear from the rest of the colleagues on the panel, and thank you for inviting me today to be part of this, and look forward to the question and answer session.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. I have a couple of notes on the margin of your intervention. For sure, at the end of this session, you will receive not only my naive and curiosities, but you would also receive questions from the audience. If we have the rest of the members of the panel online, I would like to know if we have Mr. Ulrich Breichbühl. If not,
yes, good afternoon.
Yeah, we have, thank you, we can hear you and we can see you. Yeah, we have, thank you, we can hear you and we can see you.
Great. Well, I appreciate being included in this panel. It's a wonderful fall day here in Atlanta, Georgia, early morning, and looking forward to visiting with the group. I guess I would just start off by saying I have a little bit of a different perspective because I am no longer in government service. I am back in the sector, working in both healthcare world and financial services world. But thought I might say a moment or speak for a moment or two about some of the things that we focused on during the course of the administration that I was part of, the Trump administration, and some of the lessons that I think, even though we're only a couple of years removed from that, are absolutely critical. As many of you may guess from my last name, I am of Swiss origin, was born in Switzerland, and so have a real natural affinity for Europe and things European. So when I graduated from West Point, I served for a number of years in the Army, and I chose to serve over on the eastern frontier, if you will. At that point in time, the Czech East German, the Czech West German, the West German. I'm sorry, I should say the West German Czech border and the West German East German border, so the inter-German border. And of course, our focus there was all on deterrence and ensuring that the perspective on the other side of the Iron Curtain was that the cost of invading and causing mischief was too high. And so I think, and that was during the Reagan years, of course, in the 80s, and had been for years before that. I think what really sort of marked, with regard to Europe, marked the efforts that Secretary Pompeo and his whole team were focused on, was reestablishing deterrence, reestablishing it in Europe, but reestablishing it, you know, from a post-Crimea perspective for the Russians, reestablishing it with regard to Iran, reestablishing it with regard to the North Koreans. And I was fortunate enough, in some of the exposure that I had and the work I did with Romania involved actually the transfer of HIMARS for the first time to a non-US based entity, to the Romanians. Ryan referred to that earlier. That came at the height of COVID, and quite honestly, when I first went over there to make that transfer and work with Ambassador Zuckerman, I was a little bit curious because I had not spent as much time in Southeastern Europe as I did more in Western Europe, and it was fascinating to understand the perspective that the Romanian people and the government at that point in time had regarding the threat that they faced. And I have to tell you, I think the Romanians were years ahead of their time and were really prescient in seeking to have the HIMARS. I would say, in addition to sort of reestablishing deterrence, another primary theme, if you will, of our team was the need to ensure energy independence. Energy independence for the United States alone, but also energy independence for all of Europe. And I don't think I made a single trip to anywhere in Europe without talking to leaders I was interacting with about the absolute criticality of them being energy independent. And the reason for that was very simple, and that was an awful lot of the energy resources that we use nowadays are in control of malevolent regimes that do not value freedom, democracy, capital markets, et cetera, the same way we do. And so I think as we have this conversation, those themes are absolutely critical. We've seen over the course of the last 3 years now how the failure to deter has led to a number of real disasters and ongoing conflicts. And quite frankly, the lack of energy independence has been at the core of that. So I would just sort of throw out for the group that those concepts, if you will, are every bit. There's been a little bit of adding some exclamation points and underlining that. But look forward to your comments, questions as we continue the discussion this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, this question of energy independence is a very, very present one. We know from not only from the geographical point of view, from historical point of view, we have been dependent on transit, on imports of all sorts of energy, coal, oil and gas from east, from the traditional supplier, as they call Gazprom and other subsidiary companies. And for sure, the energy independence of at least the eastern flank of NATO is very important for the United States and for ourselves. We would like to retain first impressions and comments for the second part of this panel. And before moving to Mr. Paul Saunders, if he's online, I would like just to add a couple of details about his biography. Mr. Saunders is president of the Energy Innovation Reform Project and a thought leader of energy technology, climate policy, and geopolitics. He was previously executive director of the Center for the National Interest and remains a member of the Center's board of directors and a senior fellow in the U.S. foreign policy. Do we have Mr. Saunders with us?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for having the time to share a couple of thoughts, couple of ideas about the regional security and maybe a broader sense the security of Europe and the transatlantic bond between the United States and its European allies and partners.
Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be with you all this morning virtually, and appreciate very much the opportunity to take part in the conversation. I will zoom out a little bit and maybe focus overwhelmingly actually on the war in Ukraine and some thoughts on the trajectory of that. And how that connects to this sort of broader question of regional stability. Certainly among the Ukrainian leadership, and I think also in Washington, we're increasingly seeing a discussion of has the war become a stalemate? This is something that has, I think, come up repeatedly in recent months and weeks as we've seen Ukraine's recent effort in an offensive unfold. I think for good or ill, we seem to be certainly moving more toward a stalemate. Another way of thinking about a stalemate is that it's a point of equilibrium, right? And I think we have to ask ourselves in those circumstances, is that a stable equilibrium or is it an unstable equilibrium? I think there are a couple of key factors that contribute to whether it's a stable point or an unstable point. One is the passage of time and how capabilities and other things change over time. So, certainly for the United States, and I think for our European allies, over time, from a military perspective, I expect that we'll be better and better able to support Ukraine. Certainly, there have been limitations, and will continue to be limitations, on the availability of ammunition and other things. But the more time that passes, the better we will be able to deal with those challenges. I think for the United States and NATO and others who are supporting Ukraine, really the central question as to whether it's a stable equilibrium is our domestic politics. And I think that's an open question, and it's something that's different in every country. I don't think we're going to know answers to that. Then there's obviously the question of Russia. Russia certainly has made a lot of big mistakes and has learned a lot of very painful lessons militarily. At the same time, of course, Russia is adapting. It's adapting militarily. It's adapting its manufacturing and supply chains for weapons and coming up with a variety of different workarounds. Russia has largely adapted to life under sanctions, which doesn't mean that sanctions don't have an impact. They definitely do. But the sanctions, particularly on Russian energy, have made life a lot more complicated and difficult. But at the same time, of course, Russia is continuing to earn very substantial revenues, and as we can see from the press reports and analysis, is kind of increasingly able to get around the price cap mechanism. Then finally, of course, there is the question of Ukraine and Ukraine's evolution over time, and what Ukraine is able to sustain socially, economically, militarily. I won't, since I don't consider myself an expert on Ukraine, I won't try to express an opinion on that. I'll just flag that as a question. The second set of factors, aside from kind of how events change over time, that I think we have to think about is, will somebody be dissatisfied with an equilibrium and try to break it, right, in one way or another? And for the United States and the Europeans, that means, is there an effort to provide kind of substantially more assistance to Ukraine in a way that could change military dynamics? For Russia, is there an effort to kind of change the parameters of how Russia is fighting to do things that Russia hasn't done before, like strategic bombing of cities or something like that? Something that would be certainly very costly for Russia, I expect, militarily and in public opinion. But some people in Russia might see that as a way to try to break an equilibrium. Then there's the question of what Ukraine might do to try to break this equilibrium. Finally, I guess I would flag the question of, is it possible to have some kind of a negotiated settlement? I think the first question there is whether Vladimir Putin is prepared to negotiate, and at this point, I think not. I think all evidence suggests that Putin is kind of waiting for the 2024 election in the United States to see what happens and make his own decisions. I think that it's not immediately obvious to me that Putin would sort of inherently get a better deal under a different administration than he would get under this one. That's a complicated question, that we could talk about in greater detail if people are interested. But I think it's while I think there is sort of this wide view that Putin is holding out to see whether or not Trump is elected, I'm not sure that's kind of inherently a pathway to a resolution of all of this on Putin's terms in the way that some seem to expect. Then I guess the other element we have to think about is if there is any kind of an effort to negotiate, to what extent are we kind of able to keep our side together? And by our side, I mean the United States, our NATO and other European allies, and Ukraine. And there certainly are some internal divergences there, which suggest that's also not something that would be automatic. So I think my bottom line, just from my own personal perspective, I think we are moving into something, we can call it a stalemate, we can call it an equilibrium. For the time being, I expect actually that most of the parties would be prepared to accept that, because none of them really want to negotiate that much, and none of them are really eager to accept a lot of additional costs to try to break the stalemate. But I think over time that may change. As conditions change, and I think we have to be kind of very alert to that possibility, and kind of continuously thinking about how changing conditions may shape the calculations of each side. So thank you very much. I hope I wasn't too long there, but a few thoughts for everyone.
Thank you. Not at all. You have touched upon one essence of our panel about democracy, elections, and I see clear a couple of questions about the link between waging wars and having democracies in the world. We will come back to you with a couple of questions for sure. And now I would like to say a couple of words about our next speaker from the panel. Dr. Olga Chiriac is a social scientist and professor. Her work is situated at the intersection of psychology and security studies, decision-making and strategic culture, with a special interest in military applications of cognitive sciences and political warfare. Dr. Chiriac is the Project Europe Director with the Irregular Warfare Initiative, a joint production of Princeton's Empirical Studies of Conflict Project and the Modern War Institute at West Point. Olga, thank you for being with us today. Please say what you think it is needed at this point, and please keep in mind that I would like to explain why irregular and not the traditional term of asymmetrical warfare.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Ambassador Zuckerman for putting this together. I think it's a very timely discussion on democracy and transatlantic relations. Before we get into the difference between irregular and asymmetric conflict, I wanted to just make 4 brief points that I wrote down while I was listening to the other contributions. I think the 4 things that I might want to emphasize that I think, in my opinion, will matter going forward from a foreign policy point of view, from a US perspective, would be that as the United States, we might want to mentor allies and partners to be a little bit more self-sufficient in how they conduct foreign policy and security and defense engagements. Because going forward, I think bilateral and multilateral arrangements, accords, treaties, so on and so forth, will play a far more important role than maybe alliances, and we see that in the case of NATO and the Black Sea, for instance. We have the Article 5 guarantee, but at the Black Sea, we do have the littoral navies and armed forces very much responsible for maintaining security and stability because they're constricted by the Montreal Convention. Second thing I wanted to add, maybe also along those lines, stop being so reactive and trying to figure out what President Vladimir Putin will do next and maybe construct our own vision and act towards that rather than be reactive, be maybe more decisive and active in our own actions in the foreign policy realm. The second thing I wanted to emphasize is I think going forward, coming back sort of to the second point is regional cooperation or lack thereof will play a very significant role. Again, the Black Sea, for instance, and the Baltic, they're very different theaters. If in one we had the Hanseatic League and traditions of cooperation, naval forces that have been traditionally very strong, like Sweden and in the Baltic Sea. The Black Sea is different, and it's at the convergence of strategic cultures. I'll just put it that way. Third, I think we shouldn't take democracy and our civil societies for granted because due to these asymmetric conflicts, we might not be in the situation that we think we're in. And fourth, security maybe going forward is not exclusively a military endeavor. I think that we talk a lot about how it includes the economic, the political, we used to call it dime a lot. I think that going forward, we might want to try to understand how our competitors engage in warfare and understand that we are not in a conventional conflict right now in the European theater, but maybe accept that we are in a confrontation in the European theater from an irregular standpoint. And to answer your question, irregular warfare gets thrown around a lot. It's just a little component of hybrid warfare, which is also another one of those fashionable terms. And I think that in order for us to build sustainable strategies and patterns of behavior, whether they're military or civilian, we first need to do a good job at agreeing amongst allies and partners what these terms mean individually. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion for sure.
Thank you, Olga. Well, this is a first part with introductory remarks. We are setting the field for your questions. For sure, you have already noticed a couple of things that have been mentioned by the speakers, and we will take them one by one to develop them and maybe to clarify a couple of perspectives as the panel wishes. Mr. Tully, you have mentioned with clarity the fact that NATO is the backbone of the security for the United States and Europeans altogether. Before seeing the force of NATO organizing the support scheme for Ukraine, we had political leaders, state leaders, mentioning the fact that, well, NATO might be outdated, let's say it in a mild terms. Although, if you recall, the concept was a harsh one, brain dead. Do you think NATO is still capable of enlargement? Do you think NATO is reaching a tipping point? Do you think NATO can support, sustain the efforts of other countries to get under the umbrella of the security and the defense, the collective defense umbrella of NATO?
Well, let me first start by saying, and making sure my mic's on. Let me first start out by saying that I'm speaking in my personal capacity here today, and not for the committee or for any member. I wanted to just say that briefly. But NATO is the greatest alliance that's ever existed. It is the foundation for freedom, for democracy, for preserving the post-World War II way of life that we have. And we're lucky to have it. NATO's lucky to have us. We're lucky to have it. The contributions that individual member states have made to deterring Russia, to helping Ukraine push back the Russian invasion, has been nothing short of awesome. And NATO is going to need to adapt. NATO is going to need to adjust to new security threats. And I think you're seeing that. During the Trump administration, one of the major issues that we pushed, and for the first time ever, had China mentioned in one of the communiques. And you saw that most recently at the most recent NATO Leaders Summit, that China was much more emphasized as the threat and as a need for NATO to adjust to that threat. And so NATO is a great alliance. It'll continue to be a great alliance. And NATO is not brain dead.
Okay, glad to hear that from across the ocean. Besides the NATO common will to expand the security space for all Europeans and partners in around Europe, do you see a more active role of the United States in a military sphere on the eastern flank of NATO, especially in Baltics, in Poland, Romania, Bulgaria as well? You know that we have been calling for an extended and maybe long-term presence of United States armed forces on Romanian soil as well.
But the short answer is yes. I don't think that that's going to go away anytime soon, and I think that there is a push to make a more permanent presence. I think with the 5th Corps headquarters going into Poland in a permanent way, you're seeing that. I think with the investments at the MK Air Base, you're seeing that. The presence that the U.S. has in Romania and Poland at both the Aegis Ashore sites, you're seeing that. That's not going to go away. And so you are seeing a more permanent presence. I think it's time to throw off the shackles of the NATO-Russia Founding Act, to declare it dead, gone, buried, light it on fire, and say that the Russians have abrogated that so many times over that it's not worth even discussing. But that's a decision that the alliance is going to have to come together. But you're seeing that in even our defense authorization bill for this year, a recognition that the NATO-Russia Founding Act does not constrain U.S. military deployments in any way. That was in the House version of the bill. So there is that recognition over here within some of the Congress, and I believe the administration, and you're seeing a more permanent presence. I think what you're also seeing is a desire to get U.S. troops from the western portion of Europe and actually on where they have a more deterrent value. That'll take time, that'll take investment, and that'll take infrastructure. It used to be that we had troops in Germany and in the West because they were safer. It was easier to deploy to there and to get them out in a hub and spoke model. But with the long-range precision fires and Russians violating of the INF Treaty, that's no longer the case. And so I think that kind of answers the question. You also asked about NATO enlargement too, and I think you've seen that with the Finns. The Finns are going to be great partners, great allies, I should say. Largest purchase of F-35s in European history. The Swedes also have a lot to bring to bear with Saab and some of their defense industry. Hopefully you'll be seeing the ground launch small diameter bomb show up in Ukraine, which is a partnership between Boeing and Saab. to get some more long-range fires in Ukraine, and both Sweden and Finland will make the alliance much, much stronger.
All right, thank you. You have mentioned deterrence as an instrument of the United States and its allies in Europe to convince Russia not to move in, but apparently it didn't work. Going back to what Mr. Breckbühl has mentioned about the 80s and how the things were at that time, a kind of equilibrium in deterrence on the both sides. Do you think, Mr. Breckbühl, that the current deterrence posture of the United States and their allies in Europe is sufficient enough? We have witnessed the invasion, large-scale invasion from Russia into Ukraine, and this ongoing war. Is the deterrence not working, or what do you think the next step of deterrence could look like? Unmute yourself, please.
Sorry, for some reason I was. I think the obvious answer is that deterrence failed, and deterrence failed over the course of the last. There wasn't the will, the function of having the ability back as well as the will to push. I think what happened, what you saw during the Trump administration was the ability to push back was there. In fact, we invested very heavily in increasing that ability, and we made it very clear that we would push back. I think the single clearest example of deterrence occurred in Iran, and I think that sent a message around the world when we made it very clear, President Trump made it clear that if one soldier was injured or killed by an Iranian proxy force, we would not hold the proxy accountable, we would hold the Iranian government accountable. And so taking out Qasem Soleimani sent that message very clearly that we were serious, we had the means, we had the ability, and we would do it. And you saw a very clear bit of deterrence at that point. And so I think it works if both the ability and the willingness are there. So it's not that the concept of deterrence has failed. It's that folks have not executed and followed through on that concept. I think every time the will and the ability are there, and the West certainly has the means to make that happen, I think it can be very successful. And I go back to sort of the comment I made at the beginning. I thought Romania was very prescient in asking to have the HIMARS, and I viewed that at the time when I went and spent a few days speaking with the various leaders there, that was a form of deterrence. They had the will to withstand, but needed the means. And in that case, the United States came through and delivered. So short answer, the concept hasn't failed. At times the willingness apparently isn't there.
Okay, so deterrence works only when you are inside the alliance. Once you are an US ally, for sure the rest of the enemies would be deterred not to get into fight with you. But how about countries that are outside the alliance, countries like Ukraine and maybe Republic of Moldova as well, or other countries that are outside NATO? How to deter Russia and others not to create more havoc? Others not to
I think there need to be, at that point, there need to be bilateral conversations and discussions. And I can think of a number of examples where there's not necessarily a formal alliance, but there's a bilateral commitment to defense. And so, I think that's something that individual countries end up having to work out with like-minded folks. Uh, I guess I would say one other thing, just sort of given where we're sitting today, and that is that, we spent the better part of 3.5 years really trying to encourage our NATO allies and friends to live up to the Wales commitment that they had made, and happy, unfortunately, through some very sad circumstances, but happy to see that the people are stepping up. I hate to think of where the alliance would have been had those investments not been made in 17, 18, 19, and 2020. So, the I guess the other aspect of deterrence is you can't deter after the bad act has happened. So one needs to build up and project that deterrence, in advance, and that's the only way that you maintain the peace.
Right. Should we move this discussion to the UN about the political decision from Moscow? Well, they have signed a lot of treaties, a lot of international treaties, international arrangements. They have even recognized the independence of many states, Ukraine included. However, they are not respecting what they have signed. Is it UN capable of securing a stable or a safe world today? Please unmute. No, we still don't hear you. Please check your unmute, please.
I'm sorry, I don't know why for some reason the system is just automatically remuting me. The question had to do, I think, with the UN and the UN's efficacy. I think that, if we're honest with ourselves, the UN has failed and has failed miserably on a number of fronts to maintain peace. I think the UN, today serves a function for dialogue, but dialogue oftentimes to no end. All one has to do is take a look at the Human Rights Council in the UN and see who has chaired that over the course of the last few years at various points in time. They're some of the biggest human rights abusers in the world. And so I think the UN has got to do some real soul searching and evaluate what the role of the UN is and what it's truly capable of. I'm, conceptually think that there should be a role and an ability for a body like that to have an impact. I think practicality, it doesn't. That's what the evidence says. Okay. I don't know if others have, others I'm sure have other thoughts as well, but it's, I think there's just been a broad scale failure.
Yeah, maybe the same goes also for OSCE, another organization that was created to maintain the security in Europe, and still we haven't got the impression that the OSCE is doing pretty much in the current crisis and the current wars in Europe. Now going to Mr. Saunders, you spoke about a stalemate, a potential stalemate on the war field, on the battlefield, and also an expectation that the political landscape in many countries could be influential for the outcome of the next year. Do you think it is the moment to expand the efforts, the diplomatic efforts to negotiate something before any kind of elections take place?
I have to say no. I'm sorry. I think that ultimately, it's very unlikely that this war will end without some kind of a negotiated settlement. But at the time being, I really see very little evidence that the Russian side is prepared to negotiate. And it's not clear that all of the other parties are really prepared to negotiate either. So, the first requirement, I think, is getting the Russian side to a place where it's willing to negotiate, and I just don't really see that. I think what is most important in positioning ourselves to try to take advantage of that opportunity should it arise in the future is for leaders, certainly in the United States, and I think also in some other allied countries, to do a much better job of explaining to their publics why it's important to stand behind Ukraine and how that matters concretely to citizens in their daily lives. And, certainly in the United States, I don't think that the Biden administration has done a really good job of that so far. And I think there are some other countries where leaders also seem to have fallen short in that regard.
Just recently, the president of the Russian Federation has instructed the cabinet of ministers, the entire Russian administration, to prepare their economy for a war economy, meaning that any type of resources would be allocated to support continuous war, conflict, or armed conflict, a very hot conflict with Ukraine and, of course, with others. Who knows? Do you think the Western societies, the European allies of United States are ready to sustain the same effort, having in mind this electoral landscape? We also have in Romania next year a lot of elections. The European Union is preparing to select the next members of the European Parliament. So a very difficult time, right?
No, I think it is a difficult time. I think this is another area where leaders in the United States and the West really could do a better job. Look, President Putin in Russia, the reason that he's able to do what he's able to do, to sustain this war in the face of really massive casualties and all of the economic costs and other things that Russia has brought upon itself by taking this approach. The reason that he's able to do that is that he's in control of the Russian media landscape, and he has succeeded in bringing most Russian people along with the view that Russia is in a war for its survival. And I think when people believe that they're in a war for their survival, they're willing to endure a lot of things and to do a lot of things that they're not prepared to do under other circumstances. And I don't believe that there is a comparable mentality in the West anywhere other than inside Ukraine for very obvious reasons. So I think this is an area where our leaders really need to reflect and to figure out how to do a much better job of bringing their societies along.
Thank you. Before asking questions from the audience, I would like to address one question, a particular question to Dr. Olga Kiriak about this mixture of media, economy, commercial war in and around the Black Sea. Olga, you have studied recently the things about the grain war and the resources that Russia is using to prevent any kind of normal commercial activities across the Black Sea. Is this part of the irregular warfare or not?
Well, coming back to the previous speaker, I wanted to just make a brief point and talk about the way that we engage. Again, I think that it would be a little bit flawed to go forward making the same type of plans that we've made in the past. So making our plans according to what the Kremlin thinks or what the Kremlin has planned to do, I think would sell us, the United States and our allies and partners, a little bit short. And this comes back to irregular engagement. Because what happens today is not necessarily the product of one particular administration in the White House, not the product of one particular regime in one European country or another. This is a system of outcomes that are tied to each other and have been since the end of the Cold War. The only thing is we stopped paying attention to that system. Unlike us in the Kremlin and most likely in Beijing, politicians and strategists have continued to pay attention to that. So I think that when we talk about irregular engagement or asymmetric conflict or hybrid warfare, we need to be cognizant of that and realize that we are operating in a spectrum that is very much it's multidimensional. We have to understand that the byproduct of our liberal democratic systems has been interconnectivity, and we're tied to maybe strategic competitors that in a way we were not maybe during the Cold War. In the Black Sea, for instance, with the grain deal, we are talking essentially about the freedom of navigation and international law and the way that the Kremlin knows that they can push the boundaries and use that against us, because what are we doing? We're defending the freedom of navigation in the Black Sea. But we're really not, because we're constricted by our own international law. So in order for us to at least that's my humble opinion, to go forward in a more pragmatic way that produces a little bit better results than so far, because one of the results was Ukraine being attacked several times. Last time in 2022 with the full-scale invasion, is to maybe be, again, a little bit proactive and understand a little bit how the other side views things. Because we're not operating in silos, we're all interconnected, and we have a lot of power. Our financial system is very powerful, our values are very powerful. I was still looking at the number of people that are trying to immigrate to the United States. Contrary to what you read in the press, it's still very high. We should be a little bit more cognizant, I think, of the strategic, have a little bit better situational awareness, as they say.
That's correct, I guess. And maybe if we have a look at the war, how it goes in Ukraine, what we may notice is the relentless attacks against the civilian infrastructure, the energy infrastructure, anything that is perceived as a critical infrastructure or a vital infrastructure that supports a normal life, or let's say the functioning of a civilian society. And because of that, and not only because of that, everything that is happening in Ukraine has a dual civilian and military aspect, and it's very difficult to separate nowadays. Maybe in other times, in distant wars, there was a clear separation about the battlefield and the rest of the society. But today, what we see the war even in our living rooms through social media, through television. So we get instant access to what is happening on the front line in cities, in communities. I would like to invite Mrs. Corina Popescu to address a couple of questions or to make some comments for all the panelists, for all the speakers. Corina, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Bogdan. It's quite hard because I'm a specialist on the energy field, and everybody knows that at least in the last period when we speak about security, of course, we speak also about energy. And I would like to address two questions. First, what Romania and Europe can done better in the past in order to avoid the energy crisis, because you know this energy crisis affected all the society, the people, but not only, also the economy. It's like a boule de neige effect, which can affect everything around us. And if we have some lesson learned, why we can done better in the future. And the second one, maybe for Mr. Saunders, which is specialist, how see the future on energy field related Russia? They can become again a strong voice on energy field, or it's a past things. I don't know who want to start. I hope they are not hard questions.
Yeah, who is ready? Please feel free.
I mean, I'm certainly happy to address the energy point. At Energy Innovation Reform Project, where I work, we're in the process of finishing up a 1.5-year long project, actually looking at Russia's likely future role in the global energy system as it evolves over the next 5 or 10 years. And we've been collecting a number of forecasts and working with a number of people. And we've also been in touch actually closely with a number of Russian energy experts who have left the country. In some cases before, and in other cases after the invasion of Ukraine. And these are people who I think really have still a very good sense of how things operate on the inside. As I kind of suggested before, you know, the sanctions certainly are having an impact. They're making Russia's energy business and energy exports kind of more difficult, more expensive. It's kind of imposing a drag. Russia had to go through a process with its oil exports of kind of reorienting everything, finding new buyers, finding ways to get paid without using dollars. You know, that has, by this point, I think, largely worked out for Russia. I think its role in the global oil market is kind of stabilizing, and if the United States and the West and others want to kind of make life more difficult for Russia in that area, they're going to have to come up with some new ideas, because Russia has, again, largely adapted to what's been done, and, you know, it imposes a cost, and certainly over time, as Russia is kind of less able to modernize and to get access to certain technologies and some proprietary kinds of equipment and consumable supplies, it's going to get harder still, but it's not going to shut down the Russian oil industry or collapse the Russian federal budget. And from a certain perspective, you know, the less oil Russia exports and the tighter global markets become, you know, the higher prices go, and there's kind of an effect there that makes it, you know, challenging. for the West really to inflict severe punishment on Russia. Gas is a very different story. There is a lot of excess natural gas inside Russia right now that Russia was exporting to Europe and now doesn't have a way to export. And Russia certainly is going to try to find ways to export that. They're looking overwhelmingly, toward the Arctic region and LNG development there, and trying to sell, to China and India and others, trying to get more Chinese investment in particular up there, and also investment from others. Certainly, the U.S. and some others have been following that process very attentively, and kind of, every few weeks picking out, new companies to target for sanctions to try to slow that down. That's going to be kind of a longer thing for Russia, and but because it takes time if they're able to get the money to build all of that infrastructure. They also have to build, by the way, a lot of LNG tankers that are capable of going through the Arctic ice that still exists up there. And they don't really have that, a fleet of sufficient size, and it's not going to be the easiest thing for them to build a lot of those kinds of ships quickly, even if they had the liquefaction capacity to put the gas onto the ships, and the financing and all the other arrangements. So the gas picture is a much more complex one. I would also point just very briefly, and then I'll shut up, to nuclear. And in the nuclear area, I would say that's probably the one in which the U.S. and others have done the least and been kind of the most, shall we say, selective in what they target, and that is ultimately a consequence of the fact that the uranium and nuclear fuel market is just a much sort of longer term, less flexible market than certainly than oil and even the natural gas. So it's going to take time to kind of rearrange things there. But at this point, Rosatom, I think, remains very engaged internationally and is doing a lot. And there are sort of relatively few constraints on that dimension. So sorry for the long answer, but I hope that's helpful.
I'd just like to pick up on something that Paul said, and that's on the nuke side. Rosatom is a huge moneymaker for the Russian government, and it's largely been untouched. And when you're starting to look at the nefarious activities of Rosatom, particularly vis-a-vis China, the Russian exports to China are directly being used to fuel the Chinese nuclear breakout. And I'm not talking about civilian side, I'm talking about on the weapons side. Particularly the fast breeder reactors. And so I think that while they've largely been untouched, hopefully you'll start to see a more direct sanctions push. The White House, I should say the Department of Defense, has really started talking a lot more openly just about how destabilizing Russia's export to China have been, and what that is allowing them to do for their military nuclear modernization program, and what kind of sanctions implications that could have, and what kind of implications that could have for the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Okay, we have a couple of more comments from one of the guests of this panel, Dr. Engineer Alin Diniță, please.
Thank you. Sorry, but I want to put another aspect of the security, energetic security on the table, not only war. I want to picture in your mind an image with the world when for only 5 minutes all the electric power drops. The answer is easy: chaos. So I think European Union is trying to build an integrated electric network for all the country that in the future, near future, will be controlled by AI. So the question, I think it's non-answered question, is that in the future you can implement some strong, I don't know, cybersecurity protocols that can prevent this image to happen in the future. I think it will not be easy. I think AI will someday shut down this energy for all of us. So I think the war will will be in the past, and we will not talk about war. We'll talk about AI. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. This cybersecurity and artificial intelligence and all these new technologies that are embedded with our lives have not been discussed today, but they remain to be discussed at the future session of the next edition of this forum. Your Excellency, Ambassador Zuckerman, you have something to ask from us or from the members of the panel.
Ask two of our video guests here today, my good friends Ryan Tully and Ulrich Breckbuhl, their thoughts on two issues. So I have one for each. Easy question, and Ryan, I want to go to you first, if I may. Ulrich mentioned that the European countries improved on their Wales Pledge commitments and paid up more. But as best as I understand the numbers today, only about 9 countries are at the 2% mark. Most, especially the large countries like Germany, France, Belgium, the others are well below 2%, notwithstanding promises to spend more on their armed forces. So having said that, where are we in terms of production of munitions, weapons, and other military equipment and material that's needed? My understanding is that there's a global shortage. There's a shortage in the US, there's a shortage in Europe, and there's a shortage globally. What is your insight into that, and why isn't the US picking up the pace here, in your opinion, to the extent you can discuss that?
Sure, happy to try and do so. I think it depends on the munition, first of all. I think, can you hear me?
Yes, go.
Good. So I think in large part, Ukraine didn't actually cause a lot of the problems in our industrial base, but it actually did us the favor of exposing the problems of our industrial base and our ability to produce munitions at scale. There are different, no munition is created equal, and there are different, there have been different fits and starts in our ability to get production back up. Ukraine has exposed kind of the nature of a different type of warfare where you have these really complex, highly accurate, long-range precision strike weapons, and you also have these really expensive, hard-to-produce air defense systems. And then on the other hand, you have these really, I don't want to call them dumb weapons, but you have 155 rounds that everybody in the world needs. So there's a really high demand for a lot of these weapon systems, and they have cross applications to not only the European theater, but also the Asian theater. And even the Middle East. When the Israel war started, we sent a high number of small diameter bombs and precision guided munitions to Israel. So over the last year, there's a couple things that we've tried to do, we being the US government, to fix this. The first is actually invest directly in the industrial base, the increased expansion of key munitions. 155 rounds is one, but a small diameter bomb, energetics are another, and to use the Defense Production Act that we have to actually fund that directly from the US government. The second thing that we've tried to do is to do multi-year procurement of munitions to allow the US government to, instead of buy 1 year at a time of a particular munition, to procure over a 5-year time. So that way you have a demand signal to the industry that's not going to decrease. You get a fixed price for it, so that way you don't have to worry about fluctuations from year after year. And also the sub-suppliers get a demand signal that they can react to and they can plan for, and you're not having to worry about finding different sub-suppliers for munitions of, say, printed circuit boards or semiconductors or things like that. The third thing that we've tried to do, and this is actually more European in nature, is to expand co-production and co-development of systems. You've seen press reports of particularly Javelin and HIMARS being produced now, or will be produced in Europe. Whereas, I'll just give you one example of the HIMARS system. Poland is now going to start be producing the trucks for the HIMARS, and we're going to be producing a lot of the launchers. And that gives both countries the ability to resupply Europe, but also ourselves at a much greater cost, at a much greater clip. And it also alleviates some of the workforce shortages that we have here in the United States to produce these type of things. Javelin is another one where we're going to start producing Javelins in Europe, and Lockheed Martin is going to start doing that, and it's going to allow them to increase the number of these that are available to the European market. It's going to allow them to get more workforce on hand, and it's also going to help us increase deterrence. But I mean, there's also a lot of key systems that we just stopped making, and we just planned really crappily, and the war happened to break out at a really bad time. Stinger is one of those. We have a limited number of Stingers. We stopped producing them, I want to say 6 years or so ago, and we're not going to actually start producing brand new variants of next generation Stinger for probably 3 to 5 years. So what we're doing is we're going through old stocks, we're refurbishing them to the best we can. And so those are 3 or 4 concrete steps that we've taken to help get our industrial base in a good place. But we need to continue to invest. We need to continue to send demand signals, and we need to continue to work with our European partners for foreign military sales cases, such as the Abrams case that was announced 2-3 weeks ago for Romania. That was the Patriot case that was announced 3 months ago for Poland. I think they're buying like 16 fire units. So that's a lot of the work that we've done to try and get the industrial base right. And that'll have implications not just for the current war in Ukraine and the current war in Israel, but the looming war that's out there in the Taiwan Straits.
Thanks, Ryan. Great to see you again.
Thank you, my friend.
Ulrich, I'm going to ask you this because this may come across Ryan's desk in the future, and I don't want to put him on the spot. I was just reading about the meeting between President Biden and Xi Jinping, and apparently they made some sort of agreement, not quite clear to me, about the U.S. further reducing the use and its dependence on gas and oil in favor of various renewables. Clearly, those renewables are going to be made in China for the most part, if not exclusively, in essence giving the Chinese a long-term, assuming this thing goes forward, contract to purchase a variety of renewable items. Having seen what happened 2.5-3 years ago when this administration reduced oil and gas consumption in the U.S. and put limits on it, the economy tanked, not just in the U.S. but globally. Inflation around the world skyrocketed. There's still countries in the world with inflation rates over 100%, which is hard to imagine. I don't know that we've recovered. Gas prices in the U.S. are at least double of what they used to be 2.5 years ago when this administration came to power. I'm asking you rather than Ryan, because I know you'll tell us what your thoughts on this are.
Yes, thank you for the question, Ambassador Zuckerman. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. How are you, Ulrich? We can see you too. Good to see you, my friend.
We can hear you. How are you, Ulrich? We can see you too. Good to see you, my friend. Doing well. No, I mean, you'll notice that in my opening comments, I spoke about the 2 themes of deterrence and energy independence. And I think that those are inextricably linked. Economic strength is a critical theme as well. But the fact of the matter is, it's got to be energy independence holistically, not just of sort of current sources of energy, but future sources of energy. You know, I think the fact of the matter is that the world is going to use more hydrocarbons next year than this, and more the year after. I think what's happened is that the world, the Western world, certainly has become absolutely addicted to what I'll describe as a climate religion, and a belief that all of the changes, climatic changes, are driven by human beings. The fact of the matter is, we cannot, in my estimation, allow China to bring on new coal power plants at a rate of 3 for every one that the West retires. I mean, that is foolhardy, because what we're doing essentially is sacrificing the economic engine of democracy on the altar of the climate religion, and we can't do that. So I'm a strong believer in not using more than you need to, of being prudent with the environment and the like, but sacrificing the way of life at a point in time, and allowing forces that share very few of the values that we do with us, and putting our future energy needs and livelihoods in that regard in their hands. I think that's absolutely foolhardy. I think we have to be very realistic and deal with that with the Chinese at face value, allowing them to control future so-called green energy sources, I think is absolutely foolhardy. I would, just highlight for folks, if they've never taken time to really understand the environmental impact of manufacturing solar panels and their limited lifespan, folks should take a look at that and see. That is something that, most people just don't take into consideration, the impact of, just one EV's worth of batteries, from a material standpoint, and what is done, in Africa to get the lithium supplies and the like. One of the items that I was involved with, a couple of years back, was getting the KXL pipeline permitted. And, at the end of the day, a lot of folks, for climate reasons, wanted to kill that. And I think President Biden did. And, in his first few acts in the Oval Office, he essentially revoked that permit. Many of those tar sand oils are now finding their way onto the world market. But instead of coming through a pipeline down to Houston, where they will be refined in sort of modern refineries, they're making their way across the pond, very inefficiently to Asia, and being refined over there. And so, they're essentially reaching global markets in a very inefficient and climate impacting way, or certainly a very CO2 dependent way. So I think folks need to be realistic and holistic about this, and we will not have deterrence or protection for the Western way of life if we are not energy independent, and that means both current sources of energy as well as future. Does that answer the question?
Thank you very much. Done.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen. Well, we are nearing the end of this panel. I'm sure you have more questions, more comments to add on, but please allow me just to give you a brief update on what is happening outside this building, outside this panel. In March, the GlobSec organization has conducted an opinion poll among the Romanian citizens. The results have just been released at the beginning, since the beginning of November this month. And according to this opinion poll, the proportion of Romanian responders who view the United States as one of the two main strategic partners for the country, besides the European Union, fell from 75% to 53%. That means a decrease of 22 percentage points. Due to the significant drop, the results are visible across all societal groups. In terms of age groups, the decrease in those who see the United States as a key strategic partner for Romania was 25 percentage points among the 18-34 age group, 29 among those between the age of 35 and 54, and the lowest, 12 percentage points among the Romanians older than 55 years. This is striking for me. It's not a novelty, however, because last year we had similar trends. 1 in 4 Romanians would vote for getting Romania out of NATO, out of the European Union, and joining the Russian world. So what is happening outside this panel is indeed a problem. It's an issue that we have to tackle. It's an issue that many have not confronted. Could be an intelligence failure, could be that somebody is not doing the right job, the right thing in educating people, in talking more about the values, talking more about the efforts, because democracy is not a thing that lives on its own. It's like Tamagotchi, you have to feed it day by day, you have to give something. And being credible, investing a lot of efforts, educating younger generations, but also giving examples from the government, top down, to the last, let's say, the last mayor in a remote city. It's a very, very important issue, and we know social media is very influential, and of course, not only here in Romania, but also in Poland and in Czechia. The Russians are not acting overtly against this transatlantic partnership, this transatlantic alliance, and the Russians are using a lot of influential media, a lot of influential channels like maybe you have noticed TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, and so on. A lot of consumption of this kind of content is influencing the public opinion, the decision makers, and maybe also the outcome of the next vote or series of elections in Romania. Well, the democracy, the transatlantic relation. For sure, a democracy is not waging war against another democracy. And this is something that probably should stay with us. The issues that we are facing have an origin remote in remote areas in Russia and Iran. Now we hear that China also might be some confrontational partner for the rest of the civilized and democratic world. It's a difficult job. It's a difficult task for all of us, but given the chance, and thanks to Alexandrian Group team, having these kind of events, using these kind of forums, using a lot of inputs from professionals, from people, from organizations, and using new inputs, constant inputs, I think we can keep it up. We can keep it on the agenda. We can do what is right. And again, coming back to the younger generation, the fact that 25% of these people from 18 to 34 are thinking from last year to this year that the United States, it's not the best strategic partner for Romania. It's an issue. 47% of the Romanians think that Romania doesn't benefit from the US strategic partnership. Instead, they think that we have transformed into a buyer of US military equipment and arms. So although 48% of Romanians think the United States is the right strategic partner and the Romania benefits out of this, the rest 47% is a staggering number. We have to do something because otherwise, I don't know, if something happens here, who would answer the call to present to the military conscription offices? If you have more comments, please, Nick.
You guys hear me? Yeah. It's coming through. I want to say first of all, having a trouble with this mic, sorry. Thank you to all our panelists, both here and back in the United States. It's good to see some old acquaintances showing up. I wanted to ask Dr. Olga Kuryak a question following up one of the points that I believe she was making. When we consider the challenge that Bogdan just laid out with respect to perception, clearly there's obviously people using, shall we say, questionable means to try to influence the view. But I think the problem is somewhat deeper. And I think, as I recall, you were suggesting that perhaps part of the issue is a failure on the part of the West to actually perceive the actually existing dynamics here on the ground in Romania. And my own experience has been that many people 2 years ago were thinking that the war would end in a different way. And yet what we see now is that at the very least the Russians are even closer to Romanian territory than before, and the economic situation is bad. I mean, so there is a rational basis for them to be skeptical, shall we say. So in your view, in an effort to combat that, what is required? I mean, it's not just trying to educate people according to the things that we already believe or hold, but it would seem to me that it would require some sort of adaptation of the message to reflect an appreciation for the local realities and how those actually affect people, and to demonstrate that there is some sort of responsiveness to that. One of the things we always hear is that people are not paying attention. And so with that, I thought wanted to hear what you had to say. Thank you.
That's a good point, and that's exactly what I was trying to get across. And I think that there's two sides to this. Obviously, we're speaking about transatlantic relationships because we have many in Europe. And any relationship is based on the same things, whether it's states or people. You want to communicate properly, and you want to trust each other. It's simple. So as far as trust, that the only way I think that we as Americans can build that is maybe, I'm not that surprised, because we should be present here, not just with armed forces, or not just maybe promote our military complex. We should be maybe more engaged culturally. We should be more present in universities, schools, and do a better job at presenting who we are, because the United States has evolved as well, and we're not the same country we were 30 years ago. And on the other side, I think that maybe European countries might want to, again, go back to the first point I was trying to make, be a little bit more self-sufficient and not build their identity in security and defense just defining themselves through NATO or through their partnership with the United States, a strategic partnership with the United States. Maybe that's what I meant when I said we could do a better job at mentoring countries, build up their own comprehensive defense, and maybe be more self-sufficient when it comes to that. Definitely perception, though, is far more complex than just watching TikTok and reading the news, watching the news. We were talking about Russian news. Yeah, it's cultural. Most people there get their news from TVs, and for us to try to influence that would be very challenging. So I think that what we control is how we project ourselves and how we engage, whether it's with Europe or different theaters in Europe or with partners beyond Europe.
Just a second, thank you, I appreciate that. It seems to me, though, that following again from what you said, the challenge is not simply we need to find a better way to communicate, which I think is true, obviously, but the content of the communication also has to change in some way to reflect.
That goes without saying.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay, some more questions? we can wrap it up. That is, folks. I think we made a humble contribution to the topic of this panel. Democracy and transatlantic relations go hand in hand, but it takes two to tango. Of course, we have a lot of work to do on ourselves here at home. Buying things is not always the solution. Winning hearts and minds takes a lot of effort, multiple years of engagement with multiple dimensions. It's not only about sending people across the ocean to see how it works in the United States. It's also introducing here at home the real sense of checks and balances and having a meaningful democracy. Having elections is not all, because Iran has elections, Russia has elections, other countries organize elections, some of them each year. It doesn't mean that they are real democracy. Real democracy has something more, and I think we have put today at the heart of democracy the security, but also let me remind to all of you that the final element of the security is the citizen, is each one of us as individuals, as groups, as societies, nations, alliances, and ultimately a transatlantic bond. Thank you very much. I personally thank the contributors to this panel from the United States, from my people here on the stage, and also for the audience for being patient, hearing, following our exchange of ideas. Thank you once again.